security strategy. Well, needless to say, data, omnipresent, omniscient, data is everywhere, and it's critically important to protect and make sure and ensure the data that we handle is safe. So to give you more insights on the topic today, we have Paul Witt, Vice President, North America, SASA, Cybersecurity and Forensics. So Paul brings in more than 28 years of experience, more than 24 years in the cybersecurity space. He's a well-known cybersecurity practitioner in the North American region. So he will be leading the call today, along with a panel speaker, Dr. Srinivas Kulkarni. Welcome, Doctor. And we're glad to have you here on the discussion. Dr. Srinivas is a global information security leader with more than 22 years of experience having worked across a spectrum of business verticals across insurance, aerospace, healthcare, you name it. And most importantly, he's well known for his innovation in the stream of cybersecurity, a well-known evangelist, innovator, the list goes on and on. Welcome once again. With that, I hand over the session to Paul to take over from here.
Thank you, Naveen. That was wonderful. Appreciate that. Very kind words. Welcome, everyone. Very excited about this webinar. A little bit about SASA to start with. This is not a company presentation nor a product presentation, but a little background on where we come from and why we have the knowledge that we do around data privacy and data security is always important. SASA was founded in 2006. And from the very, very beginning, SASA was a forensics-driven cybersecurity firm providing payment and information security assurance services, training, products to over almost 2,000 plus customers now across the entire globe. And from the very beginning, from our founders' beginning and all of us that are part of this, it's our greatest endeavor to take a global footprint that we have and the associated knowledge base of that footprint and feed it into every service, product, engagement that we enter into. And so, we're an authorized assessor for basically anything that begins with PCI, QSA, PCI ASV, 3DS, Visa, PCI PIN security assessor. I can probably spend the whole 45 minutes with just PCI acronyms and never get to any guts of it. But the bottom line is that we are one of only 4 certified global PCI forensics investigators. And that really gives us insight and provides us the highest level of services and support to our customers that allows us, well, not only allows, but it really compels us actually to have a high level of responsibility to our communities, whereas we share the knowledge that we gain in webinars like this and reports that we put out on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. So that's a little bit about SASA. Again, this is not a company presentation, but it gives you some background as to where we are coming from and where some of the knowledge that went into this webinar is coming from. But enough about us. Today's about data privacy, data security, and we're going to focus it on certain areas. We're going to talk about the current state of data privacy, at least what we've seen in the past 12 to 18 months, including the regulatory aspect of that in North America specifically. We'll roll that into the top 5 trends that we're kind of seeing, not only what we've seen in 2022, but what we foresee in 2023, and how those trends and that state of data privacy lends itself into key challenges that you guys are going to be running into on a regular basis. And then we'll get to the stuff that you probably want to hear the most about, and that's the best practices that we're seeing in the industry, what's working, and the tools that are supporting those best practices. So that's kind of the agenda for the webinar. And without further ado, let's actually jump into it. And as we go through this, I'll be bringing in Dr. Srini for several insights and conversations about each of those 6 topics that I mentioned there. So let's start at the beginning. What's the current state of data privacy? Again, using our global viewpoint from the SASA services that we offer and the people that we talk to, combining that with a myriad of analyst assessments that we've discovered and we've talked to and had interactions with, we can see the current state, and that is an extremely high rise of governances across the globe, pushing us to the point where about 75% of the world's population is going to be under some type of regulation by 2024, which is amazing in my mind. Of course, that rise is directly related to the massive number of breaches that are occurring on a regular basis. For example, just in the first half of 2022 in the US, there was about 817 data compromises. That's just the first half. And the second half looks like it's going to be even more than that, as we're still counting. But that's led to approximately about 53 million in the US being affected by a breach in one shape, form, or another. And as corporations in the US are battling that ends up translating into about $9.4 million per breach of bottom line cost. That's per breach. It's an amazing number when you really sit there and think about it. And in Canada, not to be outdone, each breach is about 7 million per incident. And those are bottom line costs and don't even include things like reputational hit and what that might cost you. So it's an amazing problem. And if you take these numbers into effect, the other thing that has stood out to us is that more than just about half of the breaches are all about personal consumer data. Yeah, there's some other categories, espionage, espionage stuff and all kinds of other little smaller groupings, but 44%, which is the largest of those groups, is all about consumer data, personal data, which is incredible. So it's pretty clear that's the largest objective of these hackers. And that's leading us to, like I said, about 71% of countries currently have some type of legislation in place. And that's growing to the 75% number that I mentioned earlier by 2024, which is incredible. Now, let's bring in Dr. Srini. And are these numbers resonating with you and what you're seeing down in the trenches on a real world experience? Or are you seeing something different in your orbit, or is it all around the same?
Paul, thanks for bringing me in. Well, the numbers, what you guys have posted, unfortunately, the numbers on the ground level are much more staggering and compared to reality. For example, if you see 53 million people affected through data breaches, these are the only things which are reported. Unfortunately, if you take out the baby boomers who don't even know where and how to report a breach, forget about even knowing about breaching. Like, they don't even know whether their data has been compromised in any one way or format. These are this humongous sect of people post-COVID. They are staying at home, trying to download every possible cookie and game, every possible bite, try to purchase everything without even knowing what level of data there has been breached, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, you slightly touched upon the total cost of breach, right? In terms of both responding, public relations, bringing legals, teams in play, replacement of the issue, like in Citibank itself, when they had this card skimming happening at a large scale in 2017 or 2018, the cost of replacement of every card which was under the scope was costing itself like few $1 million, right? Mm-hmm. No organization till date has been able to budget it appropriately. And I call it as, and part of my PhD thesis was all about the COPS, cost of poor security, right? We were trying to help companies to come at an approximate dollar value. Like, we can't be at an accurate dollar value. Like, we are not a manufacturing industry, right? Like, we can say that out of like 1 million cars manufactured, like few thousands cars are not having proper brakes. So I know where to attribute the cost there, right? So we don't have a cost of poor quality concept here in security. We can just attribute some kind of an element into it. And there are many unknowns which are lingering around still there. Like, one of the things is reputational cost, business rebuilding cost. Like, Marriott lost so many customers to Hilton's, right? Like, and they don't know how much they need to spend on the marketing campaigns to bring them back. So post breach. So these are like something which we don't know how much to attribute for. And the same thing also comes back to the fact is that how people are actually looking at it. Right? Today, because of the news media, because of access to so much of information, people are actually being aware of it in terms of what they are losing, how much they are losing, and what they need to do to avoid these things. Like, Well, I've been a platinum Bonvoy member with Marriott, but now if I want to go there and give my entire information, like passport and credit card, I'm a little skeptical about it. Like let's
Yeah.
face it, right? Let's face it. Like I'm skeptical about it. Like like should I trust you guys or not?
Yeah. And I think the it's a double-edged sword, right? People are much more educated these days, which is a good thing and a bad thing. Some of them are just more aware, but not really educated, and they don't know what they don't know. Others are educated, and because they do know what they know, they're more demanding, and it's having an effect on the bottom line productivity and profitability of a lot of these companies.
In fact, like you said 53 million people, right? So like, in fact, during several of my sessions, I asked people to go to haveibeenpawned.com and ask them, please type in your email address and see in how many breaches your email address is appearing. And they come back to me like, oh, I never thought my email address was there. Yeah, that's because you signed up to a newsletter where you didn't even know that that guy would have shared your email address to someone else.
Great points. And I think they lead nicely into our next slide, which is, okay, now who's going to take control and start putting some rules and regulations around this? And of course, the answer is everybody. So as an example of the current state of data privacy, and specifically for US and Canada, the numbers of regulations is getting very large and more complicated on a daily basis, with individual states coming up with their own regulations, industries coming up with their own regulations, provinces probably coming up with their own regulations up in Canada. In just this past May of 2022, in the US, a bipartisan group of legislators introduced the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. And of course, getting bipartisan anything in the US is a problem these days. So the fact that they're both on board with this is incredible to begin with. But it includes federal preemption of state laws in some areas. Also, not to be outdone, in Canada, Canada has improved upon their Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act with the new CPPA Act that is out there now. So, in both sides of the border, things are happening. There's a lot of areas to be thought of. Biometric data privacy concerns are now coming up on a regular basis, particularly around surveillance and things like that. Currently, Illinois, Texas, and Washington have their own biometric privacy laws, but there's a good 8 to 10 other states that are introducing laws, including New York, Massachusetts, California, a bunch of those. And then there's a bunch of, laws that are in red tape in different areas, either state governments or federal governments, things like banning surveillance advertising act. The Online Privacy Act of 2021 is still in red tape. The Algorithmic Accountability Act is out there and is still in red tape. So there's a lot of more of these regulations coming around. And then you jump on top of that and you have all these individual state ones. So you've got California, Virginia, Colorado. The New York Department of Financial Services has their own regulations, not just New York, but their Department of Financial Services has regulations and requirements, and they spread across not just those states, but anybody that's doing business within those states. And a lot of these laws are going into effect days from now on January 1, which is amazing that they're all kind of going and hitting the finish line at the same time. Meanwhile, there's a bunch, as I mentioned, that are still in red tape that will be coming down the pike soon, mid-year next year. So what do you think about the individual states, Dr. Srini, in terms of why they're going ahead and doing their own regulations rather than relying on federal laws? And are you seeing the same thing in Canada? So I got a fairly good view of the US, but you have probably a really good view of the Canada. Are provinces doing their own regulations, and how are they related to the federal CPPA that I mentioned earlier? What are you seeing in that part of the world?
Well, Paul, if you look at it, from the regulatory affairs at the same time, when it comes down to individual businesses, like better late than never, the federal department, legal department, or the law enforcement department has finally woken up and started to realize that they have to actively get involved, right? Because the reason is that data breaches are no more the individual concern. They have become a national interest concern these days, right? If you talk
Which
about
means votes, by the way, which means votes when things go bad.
Yep. And like you take an example for like US elections, when Cambridge Analytica came out and published that we have so many data points on, like, I think 5,000 data points on each and every US citizen. That's what they claimed. Like, that's in national security interest. right? We're not talking about credit card numbers here. We're not talking about social insurance numbers here. We're talking about data points on how an individual thinks and behaves, right? So that's scary for anybody for that matter, number one. Number two, there is a lack of trust. And that's very pertinent when we see in US, like 3 days a week, I spend my time in the US, right? So like there's a lack of trust between the states and the federal government. And that's why I see this sudden uproot of many state legislations versus federal. Now, coming on the other side of the business, right? If I see the businesses trying to manage these many requirements coming in play, the cost of maintaining the data privacy is going to really shoot up, and no business is going to take it into their profit. So finally, it will boil down to an end consumer, end user at the end of the day, right? So as any other implications of the cost increase. But what's also happening, apart from the cost, is the complexity of trying to maintain and be ready with all these requirements. Like take an example of GDPR Article 32, secure processing of the data. Well, which is exactly the same as PIPEDA Section 7. Process the data in a secured fashion, right? Like, which is exactly same as NYDFS 500 series. Now, well, although they speak the same language, but they are in different formats, their expectation is different. So which creates more complex environment for the companies to sustain with. Now, it's high time somebody is sitting at the top level and saying, wait, guys, let's consolidate these things and let's help the organizations. Whether it's fintech, whether it's financial world, insurance world, like manufacturing, and and we are still only dealing with the financial institutions and the service industries. Now, probably there is already a prediction in 2024-25, there will be much more regulations coming towards the manufacturing, oil and gas, healthcare, aerospace, airlines. So like we would be dealing with like 5 or more slides, like only just listing down these regulations in the next webinar, probably in 2024.
Yeah, exactly. And I think those points are relevant and push us right into the next slide as well. Actually, some of the points you made are made in subsequent slides down the road too. But that's how important this thing is and how salient all of these points are. When we start looking at the top trends that we've seen in 2022 and what we're going to see or foresee in 2023, at least from our standpoint, what we've seen globally at SASA, and hopefully matches with what you see. But what we're seeing are 5 or 6 different things. We got 5 of them listed here. Obviously, the one you just brought up is increased regulatory activity. We talked about it on the previous slide. You brought up the cross-pollination of things that are going on as well. It's going to continue to be a trend. These regulations are becoming more granular. Therefore, some of the loopholes are getting tighter and tighter, or at least more complicated. There's a rapid simultaneous progress in regulatory oversight. As I mentioned, a bunch of them are going into effect January 1, as well as some in mid 2023. So there's a lot of things happening all at one time. And these regulators, while they do talk with each other, just like CISOs get together and talk to each other, they do talk shop and kind of exchange ideas. But that exchange and the combination of those and somebody taking the reins, as you mentioned, and somebody above taking the reins and trying to correlate all of this stuff is very, very, very slow and almost non-existent. So that trend is going to continue. We also see a trend of data localization. So despite the aforementioned cross-pollination that's going on, but because of the slowness, in our borderless digital societies, security and risk management leaders are going to face an uneven regulatory landscape, which is really going to affect how they approach their strategies. And it's going to require different strategies based on the data localization, as well as we move into the number 3 there, the strict requirements for cross-border transfer. So it's data localization for all the areas that you're storing your data, but then also when they're in transit, we have to protect that as well. So personal data in a cross-border transfers has gained enormous importance in recent times and continues to be vital importance in 2023 for sure, including, in fact, even going back to 2020, right in the middle of COVID, there was a ruling in the EU, the Schrems II ruling, that shed light on how businesses are going to have to conduct cross-border data transfers. And we're going to see that expanding over time as we move into 23 and into 2024. So it's going to be an extremely important trend to watch as we move forward.
Yep.
Also, go ahead, Dr. Srini.
Well, in fact, couple of things to get into a much more granular details here, right? Like if you see increased regulatory activity, and let me quote an example of where I was actively involved in 2017, 2018. I was working very closely with the New York Department of Financial Services, where they were coming up with the 500 series of cybersecurity requirement, and they didn't restrict it only to the banks, like anything to do with financial services, right? You know, non-banking financial services as well, the fintech and everything together. They expanded the scope, and when they released, they were not so clear in their communication on how they will enforce the compliance. And they left it to the organization's subjectivity to come up with. But slowly, they started to realize that this is not going to help. Like, we need to tighten the bolts, we need to tighten the screws, like, because people will take every possible excuse not to meet the compliance. So then they started to enforce in 2019, where they would say that a self-assessment report will do for us. Like every year, you need to submit a self-assessment report signed by your chief risk officer, blah, 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 and all that. Now, fast forward to 2022, they have established an audit committee, NYDFS. So I am also on part of the advisory committee for the audit committee, wherein they are now going to send officers to your company, cybersecurity officers to your company, to ensure that, yes, and they will fetch all the previous reports which you've been submitting from 2019 onwards, and they'll use that as a reference and start auditing companies. Yep. Now, basically, what we are expecting some kind of a cybersecurity auditors to knock our doors, asking, hey guys, you reported that you do a pen test every 3 months. Let's look at your critical systems where your financial data is either hosted or processed or transmitted, and let's see what your pen test report shows. Now, that's going to be a scary visit for most of the companies, I must say.
Yeah, it's almost like an IRS visit, the IRS agent showing up at your house. Show me your taxes and let's look at your receipts.
Exactly, right. Like, and that's where like increased activity of regulators are going to step in today, number one. Number two, if you also see data localization. Now, there's already a trend. I know most of the guys on this call might be aware of it. There's this let's get back from the cloud. Enough of the cloud thing. Let's go on-prem now. And that's also stems from the fact is that there is suddenly started a decrease in trust when it comes to either cross-border data sharing or probably in terms of localization of the data. Like, there are a lot of regulations which is coming in terms of data residency laws. So these are things what organizations have started to wake up and say that, well, it helps businesses, but let's find out a technology or innovation, something where we can still meet privacy requirements at the same time. We don't have to be on cloud all the time. So these are the elements what we see, which is something which is on ground level, on the shop floor. The organizations have started to have discussions in their boardrooms.
Excellent insight. That's great. That's fantastic, and completely agree. As you can see, these trends are kind of building off of each other from the increased regulatory activity, data localization, how it affects the cross-border data transfers. But as with everything in our world these days, technology is also a big part of the trends moving forward, and how we can automate things and how we can analyze things. And sure enough, we see privacy enhancing computational techniques as part of the trends going into 2023. So the increasing complexity of the analytics engines that are out there, the associated architecture mandates driving vendors to incorporate what we call a by design privacy capability. These are becoming much more commonplace. The pervasiveness of the AI models, the necessity to train them, retrain them, or continually train them over time, so that you can be flexible and move with your business as your business moves. These things are going to be a big part of how you handle data privacy and data security moving into 2023 and 2024. And then on the other side, we talked earlier on the more educated consumers that are out there, and the more educated consumers you have out there, the more demands they're making of you, the more you're going to need some type of centralized, privacy interface, UX, if you will, so that the more concerned, educated consumers and citizens can have individual controls over their rights. They're going to demand that. It's going to be in regulations. There's raised expectations about transparency. These are going to drive the need for some centralized privacy user experience, privacy notices, cookies, consent management, subject right request handling, all combined into some type of self-service portal or portals, as that may be. Are you seeing that as well, Dr. Srini, as we move towards more educated users?
Yeah, well, for your point 4, I'll come to the point 5 later. For the point 4, like, I'm a big fan of AI. It has helped the entire humankind, for that matter. Let's accept the fact. But also,
completely agree with that.
What's also happening is the more we are relying on a technology, the more vulnerable we are becoming ourselves. Right? Take an example of AI fuzzing. Every application company, whether it's fintech or healthcare, one of the biggest risks for them is an AI fuzzing. Like, you don't need a hacker to exploit your app, right? So, like, there is an AI engine which is constantly running and trying to find loopholes in your code, and then trying to sit there with a malware and getting executed without even in human intervention, right? So that's one of the biggest threats for most of the application companies today, right? Whether they serve the business to business or business to customers, that's secondary. AI fuzzing is the biggest threat what they have. The second thing, if you look at, the more we are relying on technology, DDoS is another risk, right? Again, that's also partially goes with AI fuzzing. The more the AI dumps in the data dumps into your app, the more vulnerable or weaker your app starts to become.
Absolutely.
Also, well, again, what I'm trying to come through here is that, yes, AI is still helping, analytics is still helping, but still we need to favor the fact that there is a requirement of human interference in play. We can't be all of a sudden saying that I moved everything to AI and then I'm gonna like relax and sit quietly and do it. And
Exactly.
unfortunately, Paul, I see most of the C-level discussions happening in such. I bought such an expensive technology. I approved your SOW to bring in next generation XYZ, because there's always something next generation, right? There's never ending saying that I've seen next generation firewalls, I've seen next generation application security, I've seen next generation. The only thing which I've not seen is next generation humankind. So like everything is next generation, but and this the assumption of the C-level company, C-level suit, is that I paid so much money on it, so I wanted to make it work.
Right.
Now, that level of awareness still needs to be upheld for the C-level, number one. When it comes to the end users awakening and trying to say that, hey, where is my data? What are you doing with my data? How did you sell my data? I wouldn't say that everybody has woken up yet, but yes, I see there's a chatter happening. People have started to claim, especially when it comes to GDPR, people have started to raise concerns and saying that where is my data? We do, I work with several companies. We do right to access request coming in play, like where all my data is being stored and processed, whether they are within the company or outside the company, whether it's employees, consumers. Yes, that level of awareness has started to happen. Also, I want to slowly stem and turn to the fact is that till now, again, no company is able to budget the cost of how much they need to allocate to suffice to all these activities. That's an area where it is going to get much worse.
Yeah, and I think that leads us into the next slide in terms of the key challenges that our audience here is going to be running into on a regular basis moving forward. And you're right, I don't think the end users are quite there yet, but they're getting there, and that's why I think it's a trend to look for in 2023. But as we look at the current state and the trends that we just talked about, it's going to lead into these challenges that you're going to have to deal with moving forward. And we foresee 4 major, and that these are just the 4 top ones that we see. There's going to be a whole lot more. You can't boil it all up into 4, but So some of them that we see as being big challenges in the short term, data privacy versus data security. There's a paradox there, always has been. So data privacy is all about the collection, storage, use of the PII data, while the security aspect of it is all about the technology controls around how you're going to protect that data and safeguard it, as well as whether it's PII information or non-PII information. It's data security covers a lot more things. And it's a truly delicate dance between them in several areas of overlap, as well as some clear contradictions. The sharing of fraud and the trends around the exchange of security data, can contradict all of the corporations' security profile, as well as the privacy concerns and governances that are out there. Dr. Srini was just talking about the increased cost, and we've mentioned it a few times, both in the stats and everything. Increased cost is going to be an ongoing problem. Heck, the price of gas to get to work and the price of lunch is expensive for me right now, let alone the price along something of this nature. So the continued rise in the value of the personal data that's out there. And again, there's 44% of all breaches are around personal data. So there's a continued rise in the value of data. And whoever buys that data on the dark web is going to translate into increased costs. There's just no way around it. There's a direct relationship there. So the increased cost is going to have to come from the people that are protecting it, meaning it's going to take more strategic methods of protection rather than just tactically layering on another level of security on top. We have to get in front and attack it the right way. You can't just put another deadbolt on the front door of your house. You need to install a Ring doorbell and some security cameras and things like that. That's the analogy here. You can't just put Band-Aids on this problem, even though the Band-Aid's very cheap. It's not going to cut it. You're going to have to spend increased cost in order to prevent some of these things from happening and to protect the data and to, really to adhere to a lot of the governance and regulations. And in fact, our numbers are showing that the number globally that's going to be applied to this, and these numbers, again, as Dr. Srini keeps pointing out, you just can't put a real number on these. Nobody really knows, but it's going to be in the trillions, 1.7 to 2 trillion US dollars cumulatively over globally to address this problem heading into 2025, from now until 2025. And unfortunately, a lot of you folks are going to be eating those costs on a regular basis. For sure. Yes.
That's you're talking about a US military budget.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
$1.7 trillion is a US security budget. What we're talking about.
Okay. So that's a good point. And so another key challenge we see are policy spillovers. I think we've kind of addressed this a few times. Each governing body across the globe, whether it's a country, whether it's a state, a province, even industry-specific regulations and so on and so forth, they're going to have their own set of regulations. They're going to have their own rules, and some will copy each other in some ways, some will not. We see it as like a chili recipe. If you're familiar with chili, they're all based off of a similar base chili premise, but everybody has their own recipe for chili. And of course, everybody thinks their chili recipe is better than everybody else's. It's no different here. Everybody's going to have their own governance, and they think their governance is better than the next one. So New York's going to be better than Illinois. The US one's going to be better than the Canadian one, et cetera, and so forth. There's going to be overlap, but everybody's going to have their own recipe, and everybody thinks their recipe is the best. So what happens? What does that mean? That means you guys are going to have to deal with all of that. It's like when the parents fight, the kids have to deal with it. So ultimately, the challenge will be yours, that this mismatch of policies is going to increasingly make it difficult to do cross-border commerce due to all the strict data localization norms and the rules around data transfers and all of that kind of thing. The final one here is poor visibility. It's as if the rest of that wasn't enough. The fact that we've increased remote working and we've increased from a hybrid and a cloud platforms from on-premise to a hybrid and cloud platform, it's given rise to not knowing where your data is. It's really hard to track it and find it. So poor data visibility is going to lend itself to data leakage, data loss, data orphaning. All of those kind of things are going to be out there. And that's really going to cause problems for data privacy, especially as we move into the more burdensome regulations, and even as the demands of end users come about as they're more educated. So these are kind of the key challenges, and when I say key, it's just the tip of the iceberg of the challenges that we're going to go through, but it's the most salient ones that we can bring up in this webinar. Agree, disagree, Dr. Srini? Do you see other ones that are going to be just as important in 2024 and 2023?
Well, I completely agree with you on when you mentioned this tip of the iceberg. Like, let me deep dive a little bit on each of them. When you say security versus privacy paradox, in fact, I would say in last 12 months, I've worked with at least seven companies where I was actively engaged with the C-level. Now, in all the seven, which is absolutely common, is the chief compliance officer is a namesake role.
Mhm.
He's there
Exactly.
he's just there to file reports.
To figurehead.
Yeah, he doesn't have an authority to stop these chief security officer, chief information security officer by opening up a particular port saying that, no, don't do this. Or a chief information officer saying that don't move the data this way because my privacy, well, my initiative is going to get clogged. No, don't do it. He doesn't have that level of authority yet. I'm saying yet. Yet is an operative word here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, on the flip side of it, thankfully, at least some of the organizations have created that role. That's a good step, I would say. Because there was only chief risk officer. There was never a chief compliance officer coming in play. Now, there is an element of chief compliance officer where that person or that role plays the bridge between the legal and regulatory department and technology departments, right? Because unfortunately, either of these departments don't understand English and they speak to each other in Latin. Or like every CIO says, what the hell this legal officer is asking me to do? And every time there's a report going on from the CIO's office or CISO's office to the legal team, they don't even understand what's there in that report, right? So like there's always this.
It's like a married couple. They talk, but they don't hear each other.
Exactly. well, at least married couples speak or fight in the same language, but here they're also speaking in different languages.
Yeah.
Right. And that's exactly has been a big challenge for most of the companies. And that's where this role comes in play, where he's more or less the person who translates these vague requirements. Like again, I'll go back to GDPR Article 32. Secure processing of the data is the requirement. How the hell I'm supposed to mention it to CIOs? Like he said, do you think that I don't process my data securely? Yes, I do. And that's fine. That's his compliance statement, right? But now that's where the applicability matrix comes in play, where you have to list all the controls which fills all these requirements, translating into the policies which are in the company, and like how do we fetch the evidences, create the data sources, system readiness. So there's so many steps which follow through with it, right? It's not just one vague statement to meet into. Now that's where the paradox comes in play. Now that's also helps me to move towards the policy spillovers, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the chief compliance officer of some of the companies, one of the challenges is that how do I make sure that I create one element into the company which meets all these requirements? Because that is also an addition in the cost, right? To meet various and compliance requirements. Like if, for an example, if an organization is let's create a hypothetical organization established in the US and having functions in California, Colorado, Illinois. Also, their customers are in Europe, and they have one of the data centers in South Africa, and forget about, and their offshore center is in Malaysia and Singapore. Like, think about the level of regulatory requirements that company needs to apply with. Right.
My head's just spinning thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And now, can I say there is one policy like acceptable usage of an asset policy which will meet all the requirements? No, that's not possible. So that emphasizes for the team, the security team, the GRC team, to step up their skills and say that I need to beef up my work to meet all these requirements. That's an additional headcount. And also
Mhm.
they need to adopt to a technology. Like, I don't want to name the brands here, but there are companies which are working on this unified control frameworks and all these things, where they are trying to bring all these regulatory requirements, map it to simple controls. Now that is where the service companies like yours can come in and help the businesses, saying that we are here to simplify your problems. We are here to solve your problems in a much more simplified ways,
Yep.
because this is a real life problem for all of us on the other side of the spectrum. Because every time we are going up, oh, there's a new requirement coming on from Colorado or Illinois. Now I don't have a headcount, I don't have a technology enabled to meet these requirements. The legal team says, guys, I don't care about it. You got to meet it. You got to meet it. The CIO says, guys, security team, you got to. But how? How? The question is how, right?
Exactly. And that how actually leads us into the next two pieces, slides of the thing, is best practices and tools that you can use to help you get to that point. So I think we've only left ourselves. We've scared them enough, I think.
I'll take 1 minute of yours
Yep.
on the increased cost, because we
Yep.
spoke about it at so many elements. If you look at in last 3 years, the number of fines which has been imposed by the EU on the GDPR, right? Like 225 million for Google Ireland, 40 million for Enel Energia, around 30 million for Vodafone Italia. If you look at the amount where the fines have been put in place, like you're a businessman, I'm a businessman, most of the guys are businessmen. Can you tell us in 2017, 2018, well, we knew that we have to budget few $1 million as a rain day cost for these fines? Nobody would have done that. Nobody.
Right.
We all forecast for like 1 year plan, 3 year plan, 5 year plan. No CFO has done it till date, saying that, guys, I need to budget $100 million probably for the fines. Right?
Yep.
That is an element which is scary element today, right? No CFO is able to do that.
Exactly. It's a mystery. It's a mystery.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So we've scared them. I think we've scared them enough. We've depressed them enough. We have a couple slides left on best practices and then some of the emerging tools and solutions. So what I like to do is go through both of them, and then I'll bring you in and talk about both of them at one time, Dr. Srini, if that works.
Sure.
So some of the best practice we've seen leading into the end of 2022 and into 2023 are interesting to say the least. First, automating the discovery and classification of your data is going to be key. Finding and tagging the data, mapping it, the sensitivity of it, the level of authorization are all key to the overall data privacy and security strategy, for sure. And once mapped, an automation tool it can help you, and we'll talk about that in the next slide, can help you keep track of that data over time. And it can also help you be more flexible as you change things and as you move data from places to place and figuring out where things are. It's like my Roomba vacuum. It maps my house to clean it, and then it will adjust over time when my wife keeps moving around the furniture, because she keeps doing that. A data optimization tool or data automation tool will do the same thing. It'll know where your data is, and as you move it and change it, it will adjust with you as you move forward. Another best practice we've seen is in order to deal with the poor visibility challenges we just talked about on the previous slide. One of the best practices surrounds exceeding the compliance requirements that are given to you that you know of right now. So it seems odd to go above and beyond because it's going to cost you more, but by doing so, it's going to give your strategy the flexibility and the nimbleness to react quickly and smoothly over time to the many moving parts, not only within your organization, but the constant barrage of new requirements and moving requirements from outside your organization. So if you go above and beyond, it'll help you be a little more nimble and flexible to do that. Also, instead of looking at your data as a burden, so instead of looking at it as data as a burden, but create value through your data. So traditional thought was that collecting more and more data meant you're going to have a richer data library, and the more points, the more value it's going to have, the more data points you have. But in reality, the more data points you have just means that you're going to have more data to protect, more complexity in maintaining it, third-party sharing of it, protecting it, and safeguarding it. A more strategic focus on the consumption and subsequent application of that data is going to be much more balanced and have much more quality of data and give you an incremental value is a much wiser and more cost-effective way to approach that. So taking it strategically rather than tactically in terms of the amount of data you have and where you're using it. And finally, and this almost goes without saying, but we still feel the need to say it. Finding the right partners to work with is important. As the old saying goes, you're going to be judged by the company you keep. If you associate with service providers, suppliers, vendors, complementary e-commerce partners, anybody that doesn't take your privacy issues seriously and your data privacy seriously, you're going to be lumped in with them when things go bad, or even sometimes you'll be the face of that news cycle when things go bad. I know it's an old and dated relevance, but the Target breach, for example, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, whatever it was, no one hears about the fact that it was the HVAC vendor that got breached and led to the customer data being stolen. Nobody hears about the HVAC. Nobody knows who the HVAC vendor is. It's the Target breach. That's how we refer to it. It's the Target breach. So you got to choose your partners and work with the right individuals such that everybody's pulling in the right direction and everybody takes your seriousness the same way you do around your data. Now, in terms of the tools that can help you with those best practices, there's data discovery tools and classifications. So it's not just discovery, but also classifying the data. These solutions can scan your repositories, map your data, give you different ways of categorizing it, considering what's important based on your industry standards, based on your custom requirements or the governances you have to follow, or multiple governances, if it's PCI DSS, GDPR, HIPAA, et cetera, maybe some other industry standard that you need to follow. These tools can help you sort the data into different categories, label them, categorize them, even digitally signature them with certain high-level security levels, and essentially draw a map for you of where your data lives and moves. And then once you've done that, you can use a data loss prevention tool to help you figure out where you're losing or leaking your your data away. So they can monitor workstation servers, networks, both content inspection, contextual analysis of the data, whether it's being sent via messaging or whether it's in motion over the network or whether it's stagnant. It can do all of that type of evaluation to figure out where your data is, whether it's on-premise, cloud servers, wherever it is, all in order to make sure that the sensitive data is not deleted, removed, moved, copied beyond what is actually allowed by your rules. That will lead itself into content data subject rights management or consent management solutions. So this is where we get into the end users and being able to give them some ability to control their consent over what happens with their data. These tools are very good about monitoring and automating the tracking of cookies and regulations and permissions that are out there. And then finally, data privacy management tools. These tools enable organizations to secure sensitive data and remediate privacy breaches quickly. So inevitably, something's bad's going to happen. Having this tool in place, these types of tools in place will help you breach or remediate the breaches quickly. They assess and impact technical changes on privacy over time, match IT activities with business rules and regulations, track incidents that do happen. They really allow you to do privacy by design. The design of your business and how you interact with your customers and your partners. So to meet compliance requirements and also define the auditable workflows. So I know that was a lot on those last two slides pretty quickly, but Dr. Srini, any thoughts? I know the first thing you're going to say is there's no silver bullets when you automate this stuff, and of course not. And these 4 items here is just a starter pack. There's a lot of other tools out there to help you with this. This is what you would consider just a starter pack. So no silver bullets, but what do you think about those last couple slides?
Well, I'll restrict my thoughts to only two statements. One is, while you're creating a data value stream, it is a best practice to also to associate a dollar value for every node or every step of your data value stream. How much does it cost to set up this particular machine to store the data? How much does it cost to recover the data? How many people do I need to make sure that this is recovered well in time within my RTOs and RPOs? How much money do I need to spend on a tool to monitor the threats? So once you have arrived at this tentative amount value or dollar value, when you put it across by putting in certain buckets,
right, together, that is where you realize what cost I need to attribute to the data security. It's because most of the times what happens when we take the funding proposal to the management, they don't know whether are they overspending or spending less. Right? And that's where most of the proposals are shot down, not because of the efforts putting into the proposal, but the lack of clarity on why you're asking so much money.
Exactly.
Number
Exactly.
one. And that's the practical fight which I have day in, day out with companies, right, where I work with. So they don't know why are they asking so much money. Number one. Number two, it is great to rely on technology, for example, DLP or data classification. However, these technology work based on the rules defined by human beings, based on the governance, what people bring in play. Like DLP, take an example for that matter. Like, yes, DLP blocks your sensitive information to go out of the company, but have you designed the governance around with it in terms of whether your media and communications department knows what to publish or what not to publish when they are trying to bid for new customers? That's the data loss prevention governance coming in play. Data classification, data fingerprinting, that's also an element of where human brains need to be invoked to come in and do thoughtful or thought leadership sessions where I said, like, if you are dealing with SPI or PII, this is how the fingerprinting needs to be done, which is going to get fed into an automation. Now, when I say automation, I have read this famous statement. Automation is putting a new gown on an old bride. If you don't change the processes, nothing is going to change underneath, right? So it's extremely important to look at that element as well, along with the technology. Now, can this be done by one department or one section of the company? This is where uh, service providers come in play, where they bring this enormous amount of experience amounts by working on different level of technologies. I'm a big fan of MSSPs. I'm MSSP agnostic, but I'm a big fan of it. The reason being is they bring in such a diverse knowledge, the experience among various tools and technologies. I have worked with companies where there is a change in command, change in streams, the new CIO or CISO is coming in, and the first thing he does is he throws all the other softwares where the previous CISO had come in. Now, that also goes along with like the skill sets, what has been built, right? Like they change the entire course of the technologies. They shift from like Amazon family to Microsoft family. Like what about the knowledge? Like, are we supposed to fire them? What do we do with them, right?
Yep.
So now that's also happens. That is where again MSSPs play a vital role. They bring this smooth transition in play. So that's all I would like to park my thoughts on.
Well, I think we could spend 3 hours, 4 hours on this. We could probably spend a 2-day symposium on this topic for sure. But yeah, this was great. I appreciate all the insights from the front lines, if you will. I appreciate the audience. I know we had some questions that were out there. We will answer those via email now that we're done. We already went about 5 to 7 minutes over. We kind of gave you a current state. We gave you the trends that we're seeing. We gave you the challenges that you're going to run into, and hopefully we gave you some best practices and tools to use. I hope this was extremely valuable to you. I know it's the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully we can do more of these webinars with you. We will definitely answer your questions. We were hoping to get to them live, but because we're running over time, we will get to those questions and get the answers to you. I want to thank everybody for their time. I want to wish everybody happy holidays, whatever holiday you celebrate. It is that time of the year. Enjoy it, spend it with family. Have a great rest of your day, a great weekend, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. Likewise.
Thank you, Dr. Sreen. It's been great.
Thank you.